All right, it is 3 o'clock Eastern. The other time zones, was it 12 Pacific for those joining us from the other coast, and 1 Mountain and 2 Central. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Nathan Davis. I'm the Programs Committee Chair for the LGBTQ and Planning Division of the APA. We are excited to have this event to celebrate LGBTQ History Month. So we have a few slides to get through before we jump into the moderated Q&A. Is my screen sharing? I believe so. So we are the LGBTQ and Planning Division of the American Planning Association. I believe this is our first event of this nature. So we're happy to have y'all today, and excited for this event. So I know CM credits are important to many of y'all to maintain your certification. So this is registered with the APA. It is eligible for 1.25 CM credits and 1 equity credit. So there is the ID right there. I also included the link to the page on the APA for you to go and directly claim your credits. So if you have any questions or any issues with claiming those, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will make sure that those get set up for you. So what are LGBTQ historic context statements? So we'll certainly be going more into this today, but I just wanted to provide a brief textbook overview definition of what those are. So they are planning and preservation tools that document the histories, places, and cultural contributions of LGBTQ communities. They help ensure that stories often left out of traditional narratives are formally recognized and considered in local decision making. These documents typically identify significant sites such as bars, gathering spaces, residences, and places of activism. They provide a framework for evaluating LGBTQ related sites for historic designation, and they support inclusive planning and preservation efforts grounded in equity and representation. So our speakers today are myself. I'm the programs committee chair. I'll just be moderating it. These other three folks here will be the stars of the show. We have Susan Coleman from Atlanta, Rafael Fontes from LA, and Alex Westhoff from San Francisco. So we appreciate all of you being here today. I'll just turn it over to them for brief introductions. We'll start with Susan.
Good morning. I mean, good afternoon. I've been saying good morning all day, so it's like good morning. But good afternoon, everybody. I'm Susan Coleman, and I am an urban planner 3 here in the city of Atlanta in the Historic Preservation Studio. And I am also the project manager over the Preserving Pride initiative, which is one of the programming, which is the programming arm actually for the work that we did in the context statement. It's nice to be here.
Rafael.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Rafael Fontes, and I'm an associate planner with the Los Angeles City Planning Department, specifically stationed in our Office of Historic Resources. And our purview covers essentially all eligible and designated historic resources in the city. Happy to be here with everyone.
And last but not least, Alex.
Yes, hello everyone. Alex Westhoff with the San Francisco Planning Department. I'm a senior preservation planner. I'm on the citywide cultural resources survey and landmark designation team, and have worked on a handful of landmark designations for LGBTQ sites, including the San Francisco Eagle and the Castro Theater, and I'm working on a bunch more at the moment, as well as evaluating sites in LGBTQ districts for historical significance as part of survey. So hopefully we'll get to talk more about all those things. And thank you for having me and putting this together.
Of course, thank you all. And then finally, we'll just be talking about a brief intro to the rest of the conversation today. So the three context statements that we're covering are Atlanta's, Los Angeles's, and San Francisco's context statements. These are the three documents, quite intense. I sent those all out in the Eventbrite. You should have received an access link to those. So if you feel the need to or the desire to really dig into those documents, I've included those for your pleasure. So without further ado, we will jump into the questions for today. And just bear with me one moment while I navigate to that screen. All right, so first I would like for each of you to describe your LGBTQ historic context statement, understanding that each of these are different and unique in their own regard. We'll start with San Francisco's.
Sure. The LGBTQ, so it's titled the Citywide Historic Context Statement for LGBTQ History in San Francisco. And it was authored by public historians Donna Graves and Shane Watson. It was completed in 2016 and adopted by our Historic Preservation Commission. It was before my time with the department, so I wasn't around when they were developing it, but it was done with a great deal of public outreach and engagement across many cross sectors of the San Francisco LGBTQ community, which is great. But it's a very comprehensive document. You can see it. I know you sent out a link as well, but I'd encourage folks to check it out. As I mentioned, over 400 pages long. It goes back to kind of early LGBTQ history in the 19th century and goes up until basically the 1990s, kind of ending with the AIDS epidemic. So it's incredibly comprehensive. But it includes a lot of great components to it. 9 specific themes that are sort of historical themes that cover the context of LGBTQ history in San Francisco. So that's incredibly helpful when evaluating properties for significance, because we can kind of point to some aspects of these themes and describe how places are significant as they fall under these particular themes. It includes an evaluative framework, which is great. It includes recommendations for additional surveying and additional places that could be considered for landmark designations. So it's as I mentioned, incredibly helpful. It was done nearly a decade ago, but I want to make the point that it's still very much heavily utilized by us on a day-to-day basis. It's on our website, but it's not just sitting on our website. We're using it as we're surveying every property in San Francisco at the moment for historical significance and working on new landmark designations. So it's just been a tremendous asset to the work that we're doing in the department.
Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you. I'd echo the same as Alex in terms of how the context statement is structured. It has recommendations, guidelines for evaluation. I think I saw a question, but I mean, all of our context statements are free and publicly available PDFs. We encourage that people, download them and read them. But I guess one thing that might, I suppose, distinguish ours a little bit is that it was part of a broader survey effort that was done citywide. And so there was kind of a big array of historic context statements done for, for the Latino community, for the African-American community, for Asian communities, et cetera. And so it was always kind of assumed that there would be an LGBTQ version. And ours is that version, essentially. And so it really spans from World War I to about 1980. And we can get into more details later, I suppose, depending on the questions. But, it has certainly, like in one chapter devoted to queer people in the entertainment industry, pretty distinct to Los Angeles, I suppose. But I think, we'll find out more as we talk more about it.
Absolutely, thank you. And just a quick side note is that the first 45 minutes are for moderated Q&A with the questions that were prepared. And then we certainly have time as well at the end for audience Q&A. So there will be about 15 to 20 minutes at the end. If you would like to go ahead and submit your questions via the chat, those will be read aloud at the end, and we'll get to them as time allows. Susan?
Yes, certainly, as the other 2 gentlemen before me, our our context statement, and it's titled the Atlanta Historic Context Statement, is also a framework and a great deal of research on how the LGBTQ plus community has affected some of the work that was done prior, is from the social spaces to many things as the gentleman before us. I think what may make us a little bit different is that most of that information was already out there. It just was never canonized into a nice book, in which I call the Bible. Because what I do every day and what we're planning to do here in the city is to use this for a very great framework for how we're wanting to move forward and making sure that the history of the LGBTQ plus community is reflected here in the city of Atlanta. Now, we do not have any other context statements as of yet, but we do plan on using a very similar framework to do the African American community to here in the city of Atlanta. So everything that those gentlemen mentioned is what we're planning to do and what we have done as far as the LGBTQ plus context statement. It is very important, not only to the LGBTQ plus community, but to all the citizens here in the city of Atlanta. We want people to know what this community represents, and particularly in our entertainment arena. A lot of times when you think of the city of Atlanta, you think about the hip hop community, but the LGBTQ plus community has also put a stamp on many of entertainment. So this is what we're planning to use our statement for.
Wonderful, thank you all. And so the first question is actually back to you, Susan. So kicking it off with the in-depth analysis, really what inspired Atlanta to undertake a LGBTQ historic context statement? And then how does the Department of City Planning define its goals and scope?
Okay. Well, first of all, as I mentioned, and you asked, and when you asked in regarding to us what the context statement is, the first thing we did was nothing was canonized. There was information out there about a lot of things in the city of Atlanta in regards to LGBTQ plus community, but at a particular point, there was a push to designate one of our iconic local buildings here in the city, and it's called Atlanta Eagle. I mean, and then in the early part of this decade led to the recognition that the city needed a way to better identify and evaluate the historic significance of its historic LGBTQ resources. And we realized we really didn't have that. We had bits and pieces here and there and everywhere. And so two of our major partners, because we had partners involved in this, one was the city of Atlanta and the other was Historic Atlanta, got together and we tried to designate the Eagle. And so that was very important. That is how it all began. And so the context statement was created to identify other sites for potential. At that point, this context statement was we identify other sites for potential local landmark designation by the city and develop a map of known places associated with the city in the LGBTQ plus past, and develop a narrative and identify historic themes and provide an evaluation framework. So all of it began there. So we know we needed something to really capture all of this history. So the team defined the scope of the context, and then while also making sure to cast a wide net, like I mentioned before, by communicating to the contractors hired to draft a document. New South, another partner with us, came aboard. And then, so this is how the context statement and our planning department develop. Our goals for our planning department is always to be inclusive of all groups in the city of Atlanta. We realize our goal is to tell the history of the city of Atlanta from its inception to now. And so, of course, the LGBTQ plus community is a part of that. And we want people to understand that we want to recognize the work of everyone in this city. So that is always our goal. And we also would like our communities to be a part of saying what they want to be out there for all of us. And so that is what we do. That's something we do on a day-to-day basis, as well as through our programming.
I made the classic mistake of not unmuting myself. Thank you.
Okay.
And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that this weekend is Atlanta Pride, so it's a very special moment for the city of Atlanta. So the next question is for all three, but we'll start with Rafael. Can you describe how the context statement has been used in real-world planning, preservation, or development review processes since its adoption? You're also muted.
Classic me. Sure. Yeah, the most immediate effect has been the result of several new what we call historic cultural monuments, but are locally designated landmarks. I can think of at least 5 that really have depended on the context statement off the bat. I mean, Tom of Finland House, 2 houses associated with Morris Kite, who was a prominent gay rights activist in Los Angeles, and Oil Can Harry's, which was a gay bar in the Valley. Yeah, that's been the most immediate effect. And secondary to that has been, in other cases, we've had properties come to us or be brought to us, which in one case did not appear in the context statement at all. And so that was its own sort of challenge in terms of environmental review. And then another one which was brought forward to us just sort of, again, sort of independently, which was in the context statement. And then we had a very different conversation about that one, which at present has not been designated, but still could be.
Alex?
Sure, thank you. I really see it as 3 distinct ways that we actually apply the context statement through our planning and preservation work. And the firstly is through environmental review that we have to do under the California Environmental Quality Act. But basically, anytime there's a discretionary project that's proposed for a building, we have to do review to determine if the building is a historical resource, and then determine if there's going to be an impact to that building if it is a historical resource. And so we do evaluate resources for cultural associations, including LGBTQ associations. So we've had some examples, like there was the Nob Hill Theater project that a few years ago where that was actually a gay male adult entertainment venue from 1968 to 2018. And it was identified in the context statement as a potential resource with that association. And the project was proposing 4 new housing units, as well as reusing the space for medical offices, and it did trigger an impact. And so that's an example of where we determined it was a resource. And then from there, they had to do mitigation measures such as oral histories, HABS drawings, a coffee table book, some retention of the vintage sign, and things that all stemmed from the application of that context statement, essentially. So that's one way. The second way, I mentioned our citywide cultural resources survey. So currently we're surveying every property in San Francisco, a multi-year effort and very much inspired by what Los Angeles has done. For historical significance. And so we're definitely surveying some of the LGBTQ enclaves, such as the Castro district, and making decisions about historic districts as well as individual sites. And so we have to evaluate every property, and the evaluative framework is being pulled from the context statement. So that's incredibly helpful. And then the third way is through landmark designations. As I mentioned, we have I'll say a good metrics of success is when the context statement was originally completed nearly a decade ago. We only had 3 sites with LGBTQ associations, 3 landmarks specifically, and now we have 10. So the number has more than tripled. So that's wonderful to see. But when we do landmark designations, we can use the evaluative framework and the specific themes to basically discuss how something is significant. So that's great because it sort of provides a framework for those. And we're also working on 7 new LGBTQ landmarks at the moment, and those were recommended from the context statement. So that's a great application of it as well.
Thank you all, and that's wonderful to hear that these are not just static exercises, that they're living, breathing documents. And then Susan.
Yes, I guess I failed to mention at the very beginning, our Atlanta Historic Context Statement is fairly new. So the very first thing that we did was we established, and I did mention this, establish a programming arm, which we call Preserving Pride. And so that's immediate work that we have started to do. Last year was our first year of doing the initiative for preserving pride and speaking about the AIDS epidemics and in the African American community in particular. This year we're planning, this will be our second initiative, and we're planning to do an event on this month, actually, as you mentioned before, Nathan. This is Pride Month here in the city of Atlanta, so we wanted to do something to add to the events that are happening all over the city for October. So we're doing our second initiative, which will be called Exploring the Evolution of LGBTQ plus in the social spaces that were created through resistance and activism. So that first event, I mean, this event actually will be October the 21st, and we have some really great speakers and people coming out to speak about that. That's one thing we were going to do every year, and throughout the year are these Preserving Pride initiatives. And then the second thing we've already done actually through the designation of the Atlanta Eagle building, but we're wanting to continue to designate other landmarks that we have identified through the context statement. So we're planning to do that to identify some more. We'll pick the ones that have been identified and go through those, and we have to go through a whole legislation process to get them done. So, but we should be doing that very soon. And then I work in a historic preservation studio, so we have over more than 35 historic and landmark designations we were already preserved. So we thought, well, why don't we look back through those designations and see what LGBTQ plus presence are in those designations, because when we did that, we never looked for those particular designations in those areas for significance. And we're pretty sure there's a lot there. And we're always constantly trying to reach out, and we're going to do more surveys to see what else is out there that we may not have captured in the context statement. And in fact, at this next Preserving Pride initiative on the 21st, we're going to have another mapping session there for people can put whatever, because we have a lot of underground activities that went on that we may not or may know about. So we're constantly working the context. It's not a stagnant book. We're planning to make it live and breathe every time we use it. So
That's wonderful. Thank you, Susan.
mhm.
So the next question is for Rafael and Alex. We'll start with Alex. What challenges did you face in identifying, since you weren't with the city at the time, what challenges did the city face in identifying, verifying, or interpreting LGBTQ historic sites, especially when working with limited or informal documentation?
Well, I mean, I think that is the challenge that you're describing is limited and informal documentation, and I think critical to it is just robust community engagement and incorporating things such as focus groups, oral histories. To the extent that you can speak to long-term community members and getting their input on particular topics or places. I think really really working that into the development of a context statement is critical. And these documents are not something that can be done quite quickly. They do take a lot of time and process and thought, and from steering committees, and as I mentioned, this was done by qualified historians who definitely structured a community engagement throughout the process to ensure that there were voices of from the diversity of the LGBTQ community in San Francisco. So, and it, even once the document has been finished, we look at all of our historic context statements as living documents and things that need to be updated with time. They're not themselves complete surveys. There's still a lot out there that we don't know. They're not intended to be surveys. So we're continuing the tradition of doing oral histories through some of our other efforts. Susan mentioned the Eagle Bar in Atlanta, but as I mentioned, we designated the San Francisco Eagle Bar as well, and that was the first. That was the first landmark I worked on with the department, but there really wasn't a good documentation of that history. It goes back to the 80s, but there wasn't much about it at the time. So throughout that landmark designation, I did a bunch of oral history interviews with long-term patrons of the site, past employees, that sort of thing, and essentially to structure the context of it. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Rafael?
So challenges. I mean, Alex sort of addressed a lot of the similar themes that we face, and I think I can talk specifically about the case where recently, I think about a year and a half ago, a space was brought to our attention that had actually been missed as part of the same type of environmental review that's required in San Francisco and throughout California, where we had a housing project for which a historic resource assessment report had been written about this building based off of a survey from the 2000s, which obviously did not include any queer history at all, right? Part of it sort of triggered a discussion, which we sort of engaged some consultants that we knew who were also members of the community and had, have done at least 2 successful nominations with us in terms of like what we could have looked for, what really got missed. And some of that, of course, did relate to the historiography. I think you'll find that when you look in the bibliography for our context statement, there's a lot of books written about Gay LA, or a lot compared to many other cities, in my experience. But you always have to understand that, those books depend on academic research that's very focused, that took place, as Susan and Alex mentioned, over a series of decades. The first attempt to map sites in LGBTQ sites in LA took place in the late 90s, right? So our context statement already kind of had some of that feeding into it before we even had the idea to make a context statement. But essentially what, at the moment, I mean, that space is still extant. The business is still active. I mean, one of the core issues, of course, was related to ethnic history, which is it was a bar that had been, as far as we could tell, a bar for gay Latino men as far back as the 1960s. In the 1980s, 90s, around the time of the AIDS crisis, it became and has continued to be a bar that really was a safe space for trans Latino women. Although, we've, through some of our elected officials, had reached out to community organizations. Their reactions have been sort of mixed. It's one of these open questions at the moment, but it kind of illustrates some of these challenges where the documentation we had on it was pretty informal, pretty recent, and pretty subjective, and sort of coming from only like sort of one source. So I think my colleagues could probably attest on this panel to, that's something that kind of continues to be a theme in these cases.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. So moving on to the next question. This one's for all 3 of you. Starting with Susan, how do you feel, or how do you see LGBTQ historic context statements contributing to broader equity goals within planning and preservation practice?
Yes. Well, with any group, marginalized, and I really don't like using the word marginalized, but any group that's less representative, the more visibility you have, whether that is through physical space or through storytelling, and whether that's oral history, the more equitable it becomes because more people know about you. And so the work that we are doing, we're amplifying the voices of the LGBTQ plus community. We're planning to allow for more representation through more landmark designations, through more preserving pride initiative, through more community work. And so the more you do that, the more you become more visible. We hope that people can realize that everyone is human and everyone is valued or should be valued, no matter if you're African Americans, no matter if you're Latinos, no matter if you're the LGBTQ plus community. And so that's what we're trying to do in the city of Atlanta. I said, we're our historic context statement is fairly new compared to the gentlemen between what Alex and Rafael are doing out on the West Coast, mind you, because remember, we're in the South. And so which place has its own different connotations to it. So although Atlanta is probably one of the most progressive cities in the southern part of the country, there's still some limitations there. So the more visibility, the more you speak about it, the more you resist people trying to put you into a little box, the more valuable you are and the more equitable you become. So that is what our goal is. I think that's what the city of Atlanta, as in the city of Atlanta as a whole, that is what we like to every human voice. Everyone makes a difference in this city. And every one of us have built this city to what it is, and they should be recognized. So more visibility is what we want to say.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, Atlanta's, for those of you that don't know, Atlanta's tagline often is the city that's too busy to hate. And so that's what we've been known for quite some time. The next person to speak on this would be Rafael.
Just regarding to the challenges question.
Yeah, I can repeat it. So this is about how do you see LGBTQ historic context statements contributing to broader equity goals in planning and preservation campus?
Right. I mean, I guess in the broadest sense, a lot of queer people, we generally don't grow up with elders telling us who we are from a young age and what that means, right? Almost all of us have to, in order to discover our history and embark on a search for it to a large degree. And the very sort of category of gay history, queer history, has really only been legitimately recognized, I mean, for the past quarter century. And I'm being generous with that assessment. One thing that I had encountered in some of my research was that there was an effort to landmark a resource for its gay history back in 2000, 2001. And for a lot of reasons, that effort, never really panned out. And part of what did inform our context statement, sort of unofficially, was that there really was a community effort, to landmark the Black Cat Tavern, similar to Stonewall in a way, although it happened 2 years before. Again, it just sort of speaks to a lot of the same things that Susan just spoke about, which, that people need to feel seen and that they need to understand themselves in a place as part of a continuum. And these contexts are a great start to sort of like making that official, or at least giving it a sort of official recognition that you literally have a place and that your history and your story has a place, and you can find places that speak to that.
Thank you. And Alex?
Yeah. So in terms of broader equity goals, our Historic Preservation Commission in 2020, following George Floyd's murder, did pass resolutions, racial and social equity resolution, which included things. There was basically an audit done of our existing landmarks, and basically it determined that less than 10% of the existing landmarks, there was probably about 300 city landmarks at the time, had associations with underrepresented communities, so LGBTQ people, people of color, women, etc. So through the completion of the context statement, I mean, this context statement was already completed, but through that resolution, we also prioritized the completion of other context statements. We did recently last year complete the African American Historic Context Statement, and currently we're focused on the Pan-Latino, the Chinese American, and the American Indian Historic Context Statement. So those are all contributing to broader equity goals and ensuring better representation of the sites that are traditionally associated with underrepresented communities. So that's great. I think the LGBTQ Historic Context Statement itself also kind of pushes the envelope and does encourage within the LGBTQ community to ensure that there is diverse representation of historic sites. And I don't deny that a lot of the existing landmarks, that there is a large concentration that are associated with cisgendered white men. And I think that we have some time to go. We did have some great milestones more recently. We had the first transgender landmark with Compton's Cafeteria, which was the site of important riots in 1966, even preceding Stonewall by a few years. So that was kind of a great first, and that stemmed from work that was done in the context statement. There was also the Lyon Martin House, which was the home of the lesbian activist couple that did a really great amount of amazing work. So that was the first site with a strong lesbian association. So there's some diversity in terms of the representation. And two of the current proposed landmarks, the newer ones, also have lesbian associations. So I see that list growing and becoming more diverse. I think we could also do a lot more work identifying sites with LGBTQ people of color associations. So I think we have some way to go on that. But the context statement does identify some of those sites and encourages the prioritization of those sites as landmarks.
Thank you. And the next question is for Rafael. What lessons would you share with other cities just beginning this process, particularly those with smaller LGBT communities or fewer resources?
Right. Well, I think I mentioned previously that, even about 13 years before our context statement was published, there had been a mapping effort, right, of what then they just called gay and lesbian Los Angeles sites. Even that depended on probably decades of research that activists have been doing really since the 70s, as far as back as I could tell. I guess the one statement I would say to anybody who's sort of working on something like this is try to understand what that memory infrastructure in your local queer community is, right? I mean, a huge part of what made our context statement well informed was the One Archives, this entity which, was a really community-based archive that had been around in some form or another since the 1950s. Very slowly, and by the 2000s, it became integrated into the University of California's library system. So now it has a much more formal kind of presence. And there's recently a reconstituted foundation that is now putting on an annual Queer Histories Festival. They just opened a couple weeks ago, their third one. As part of, my role, I've spoken on some panels there and to help sort of get the word out. And I would say just urge people to look for similar activities happening near you, even if it's regional or state, that you kind of want to understand like where that community is to find their history.
Thank you. And the next question is for Alex. Have any sites identified in your context statement? Well, you actually kind of already answered this a little bit earlier with regards to having them formally designated or protected as a result of the document. So with that said, there's one other question I have for you. So now that the context statement is complete, what is next in the city's efforts to support and elevate LGBTQ heritage?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so I mentioned we're doing our citywide cultural resources survey, and we're surveying every property in San Francisco for historical significance. And so we are right now focused on the Castro district and identifying a historic district within the Castro. And so we're doing a great deal of community engagement on that. And so that's one effort that's currently underway. And then we're also working on 7 new landmark designations. And those are all coming directly from the historic context statement. So that's great. We're, working on some, kind of unique sites like the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, for example, which is a building that in 1982 held what may be the first AIDS organization in all of the United States. And that the building itself isn't particularly architecturally ornate, and it's had some transformations. I mean, the storefront doesn't look the same as it did at the time. There's been some alterations, and so it's really important that we have the context statement because it includes some language about both short-term tenure. I mean, basically, this AIDS Foundation had only existed at that site for not even a year, I think only a few months, and so it moved other places, it grew, it expanded, but was only there for a short period of time, but because it was likely the first one in all of the United States, it is of enormous significance. So the context statement includes language that short-term tenure should not be weighted against significance for when evaluating LGBTQ sites. So that's been incredibly helpful. Additionally, there's language about alterations and assessing and evaluating integrity for LGBTQ sites. And that's incredibly helpful. As I mentioned, the storefront alterations, there's been storefront alterations on this building, same with Compton's cafeteria, for example, but how does that necessarily affect the integrity of a site with a cultural association? Basically, the context statement includes language that things like feeling and association are more important when, as far as integrity goes, than design, workmanship, materials. So that's some great language. I'm just mentioning this thing for other communities that are working to embark on their context statements, that it is important to consider this kind of language and integrate it into your context statement so that when it does come time to identify, evaluate, designate sites, you have a document to point to that has been, adopted by your HBC or whatever your respective body is, that to help move these things forward. So this is very much an ongoing effort. Our survey and landmark designation effort is going to be going on for years to come. We have a while to go, but we're definitely continuing to prioritize LGBTQ heritage through what I just described.
Thanks, Alex. And Susan and Rafael, if you'd like to chime in on that question, you're more than welcome to.
Yes, I'll chime in here because I agree with what Alex has said as well as Rafael. Our context statement, I mentioned this earlier, it's like a Bible. I mean, it's so rich with rich information in there that I haven't even had the time, honestly, to go through it the way that I need to go through it, but plan on doing that. I'm also a part of an oral history program that we're embarking upon on ourselves in our city. So we're definitely going to be using more oral history and fleshing out more LGBTQ plus participation in that. So that is definitely something that we will be doing. And we like to partner a lot here in the city of Atlanta with other groups of people who might be doing the same information. We would like to kind of keep this, not to have this information over here and there and there to confuse the public and where to go, and try to centralize this a little bit better so that people who's doing this research will also have a home base to go to too. And so that's how we see the city of Atlanta. As mentioned before, we realize we've done a lot of landmark and historic designations in our city, but to include in those landmark districts, there's definitely some LGBTQ plus participation that was not fleshed out. So we definitely want to go back through those landmark districts and identify those things. That's important for us to do. I mean, it's just important to always see the Atlanta Historic Context Statement as a breathing and living document. It's not stagnant. So we understand there's much more information out there for us to discover. And so that is, but it's good to have this canonized version to help guide us. And so if anybody else in smaller southern cities that's trying to do that, then just partner with people, get their information all together as much as possible and go for it. And that's what we did. So that's what I want to add to what these two gentlemen have said. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Alex and Susan said. Partnerships are really critical. I mean, the partners who worked on our context statement were a huge, huge help. Even when there are gaps, those are addressed, those are talked about. They kind of lay a groundwork for what needs to come next, right? And I think I mentioned before, you know, many of our context statements in LA, you know, have that 1980 cutoff date. Obviously, we have to move beyond that, especially for when we're thinking about chapters like the AIDS crisis, which thankfully, you know, Alex and Susan, both of your context statements actually address in an aggressive way. And of course, you know, it's a big to do at the moment. You know, our office is we're really partnering with the Getty to sort of revamp our African American cultural context statement in a fairly significant way to update it more. And so it's, you know, I know it depends because obviously we all, you know, work with or for governments that, you know, have a limited number of resources, things have to be prioritized, you know, but yeah, again, partnering, critical.
And if I could chime in just a little bit more here, I think because of, not to make this political, but because of the need to constantly work with resistance, it's important to update the context statement because this is another significant part of our history right now that we're going through, particularly with the LGBTQ plus community and other communities that will need to be documented, that will need to be discussed. And because people might feel the need to go back under in hiding. And when you feel the need to go back into hiding, then you lose some of that history. So it's very important to make people understand this is a continued work. It must continue forever because history repeats. And that's what it's important to understand this.
Absolutely, and pride is inherently political, so I appreciate that comment. So with that, that's the end of the questions that were prepared. So now we'll move into see some questions from the chat. So any attendees that would like to ask questions, please put those in the chat at this time. It should be down at the bottom bar of your screen. And then if there's a particular person that you'd like that addressed to, please also note that in your comment. We're going to try to get through as many of these as we can, and with the time that we have, we will do this until about 4:10, and then we'll have some closing comments from each of the panelists, just to wrap up today's thoughts, and then that will be the conclusion of the webinar today. So just wanted to thank everybody for their time so far, and you're welcome to go ahead and put any questions that you have in the chat now. So we'll start with some of the questions that are already in there. So the first question is about language. And I know in some of the context statements, language is addressed, and how it has changed over time. And so the question is, was there debate in the cities over the applicability and appropriateness of the word queer? And to expand upon that, I know some of the context statements also address some other words at the time too that were previously not appropriate and are now have been reclaimed and vice versa. So we'll start with whoever wants to jump on that question first.
I'm happy to go off to start it off because I think when everybody in this session takes a look at our context statements, you'll notice that ours does not have the Q appended, and there is a sort of notice to why, and some of it was in regards to hesitation over the use of the word queer as a slur, which was a main point of concern especially with a lot of the oral history that fed into some of the academic history. Many of those activists were pre-Stonewall or immediately after. For them, that was a slur. And I think that was sort of like a cautious choice then, which again, we're very open to re-looking at eventually. The National Park Service's context statement had an even longer sort of, I guess, justification as to like why they included the Q. Although I don't think you can find that on the website currently.
Yeah, that thought crossed my mind the other day if that has been preserved somewhere. Hopefully it has, because I'm sure the NPS took it down. Susan or Alex, did y'all have any thoughts on that, the language topic?
I could just suggest if people take a look at our context statement, there is a note on terminology at the very beginning that does sort of discuss the rationale for including the use of the word queer in it. It basically, just to summarize, it states the umbrella term queer is used to present an inclusive picture, and in cases where participation by specific groups is unknown. So it does mention that it was once a pejorative term, but it has changed to being a more inclusive term. So if people want some language, they could take a look at that.
I will echo Alex there as well to look through our context statement. I came in at the latter part of this, and I don't think the discussion of queer came up, but or any language terminology of that sort. So, but please do look through our context statement to see about it in more detail.
Thank you all. So Ty had a question about this current administration. Has anyone on the panel experienced undoing of LGBTQ context statements in the face of the current administration? And I think to expand on that more broadly, how have your cities either pushed back or adapted to the current hostility to the LGBTQ community that's coming out of Washington?
I would like to address that. Fortunately, I live in a city where our mayor and our governance is very progressive and actually has doubled down against the current administration, United States administration, in trying not to be inclusive of the LGBTQ plus community. So that's very fortunate for us, because in our mayor's office, there is a division of diversity. And so that is very much a part of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and we even partner with them. So we have not, fortunately, been affected by the negative connotations of that. And hopefully we will not. But as I mentioned before, it's resistance to be free. And so I do believe in a city like Atlanta, which has primarily been addressed with African American issues and resistance, that for the most part, we're going to resist against anything of that nature. So we have not experienced that at all here. And that's being very fortunate.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to see that as cities throughout Florida have removed their pride crosswalks, that Atlanta has kept its and actually just repainted it a few days ago. So so that's wonderful. Alex, Rafael.
Yeah, I mean, I would think, I mean, certainly from our department's perspective, that I guess we haven't really thought to dignify what's happening in DC with a response in that way, at least officially. I know a lot of our local electeds certainly have, and they're sort of very against, the changes that have been happening. I think even this week there's a rededication of a rainbow crosswalk in Venice, so it's one of these things where we see it happening, and there are responses, but like Susan said, there has thankfully been no undoing or effort to sort of repeal this work.
That's wonderful. Yeah, California is a little bit more insulated from the Washington going ons than Georgia is. So that's good to hear. The next question is from Destiny. How are the processes for developing the context statements funded? Also, are there any lessons learned for how these projects can more easily be completed by smaller cities?
It was funded through a partnership, as I mentioned before, with us. In the city of Atlanta, we did have, if I'm not mistaken, a grant that was done, as well as partnering with New South and Historic Atlanta to bring about the work. So partnerships came because it did take some time and it took some resources to do it. In regards to smaller cities, I think, if you can partner with a private entity as well, there's nothing wrong with finding resources to help you to get this work done. So partnerships, I'm a big believer in partnerships. And so we do a lot of partnerships to get things done in the city of Atlanta. And grants, you can get grants.
Ours was funded by the city general fund, so we're blessed with having that resource. And I guess it's always difficult to give advice to smaller cities and towns that don't have these kind of resources. But I do want to mention that the National Park Service did an LGBTQ theme study several years ago, and I know that's been removed from the website, but it's still definitely floating around on the internet, and I'm sure it's out there if people want it. But that can be helpful as a starting point for those that don't have their own context statements, as it does outline sort of themes and trends more broadly as they relate to national history, but at least it's something that you can use to sort of structure a context around for distilling it down more toward the local level.
Yeah, I would quickly add, for us, obviously some of the city's money went into this effort, but the Getty was a huge influence as well as part of the general Survey LA effort. But yeah, like Alex said, like a lot of these contexts are out there. I have every chapter of the national context saved, so if anybody wants it, just email me. But those things can really serve as guides because every place is going to look different. Queer life really varies from place to place in very interesting and ways that need to be honored.
Absolutely. The next question we have is from Aaron. Speaking of relocation, have any of you found trends of LGBTQ plus organizations moving to multiple locations around your city over time? If so, how have you been able to document the connection between those places clearly in your deliverables, i.e. digital maps, tables, lists of places, etc.? Same question for documenting that an entity's status is defunct in an earlier location but still active in another.
Well, I'll go first again. I want to keep going first. But yeah, so in Atlanta, because Atlanta is constantly growing, and so what we're finding out that in our central location where the LGBTQ plus community probably had most of its presence, it's kind of being pushed out slightly. And so it becomes, or it has moved over out into more of this suburban areas, for instance, and Outright Bookstore, which was probably in the more centralized when I first moved to Atlanta area for where the community was. is now gone. But still there's presence of the LGBTQ plus community, but probably more readily would be the Cares bookstore, which was Center and now has moved out to Decatur. And so it moves, it moves because people move and things change. What we're trying to find out through our Preserving Pride initiative on the 21st is we're trying to find spaces that people may never have known existed on the outer skirts. It's sometimes the underground things that were happening that never got recognized. And then as you guys were speaking about African American community, which also had another culture inside the LGBTQ plus mainstream culture. So it's very important to try to identify that. But we are noticing that most things center in the Midtown area in Atlanta, but we are definitely seeing some different movement on the outer skirts of the city. And we would like to document those movements and those situations as well.
I guess I could say, the question is framed in terms of organizations, right? And so part of the issue, and again, to get back to this 1980 cutoff date that we have, which you can tell I think we need to move on in our situation, but is that date was really only when, per the history I've seen, when you actually start to see the institutionalization of like queer organizations and spaces begin to proliferate, and so one instance where this has come up is not so much a significant organization, but one person. And I mentioned Morris Kite before. We actually had 2 houses successfully landmarked associated with him, because one was him running a secret underground STD clinic for queer people. And the second one, he's already been integral in founding what's now the LGBT Center, right? So now the roles of those 2 houses speak to different chapters of gay rights in our city. Thus, both of them were eligible for landmarking, regardless of the fact that they were both associated with one person, right? That was something that our staff was challenged on as part of those like sort of city council committees, and it's tricky because depending on how far back you're going into history that was intended to be clandestine, right? Like that's, people did not want to be found in official systems of recognition. But again, if we're looking beyond, I mean, a lot of institutional and community organizations really came into being and proliferated as a response to the AIDS crisis, which is something that our context, specifically in LA, does not yet address, right? And so that is getting tricky because you're dealing with organizations that, in the case of LA, still exist and also take an active role in urban planning. They have multiple locations now, so it opens up new questions in terms of which location are you going to consider to be significant under what theme. Is everything they do significant and worthy of landmarking? The answers are going to be up to each community to sort of make that determination, I think.
Sure. I think what my co-panelist said all makes a lot of sense. And, I think it is a challenge. And I mentioned like the San Francisco AIDS Foundation and the building that's currently under consideration for landmark designation. It was only there for a few months, really, but because it was the first location of it, and it was likely the first AIDS organization in the United States, it definitely, merits this high level of recognition and significance. So it's moved to one other location after that and is now in a different location. So it's moved around quite a bit, but I mean, that's just expected as it's grown and expanded. And, I think it's difficult I mentioned incorporating some language into the historic context statement about tenure, and our context statement very clearly states that short-term tenure shouldn't be a factor weighted against significance. So I think that's really important when we think about identifying and memorializing these sites.
Yeah, thank you all. And I it also comes to mind that Petra Doan, an author from or a researcher from Florida State, also has some really good research on this topic about resurgent gentrification and other trends and forces in society today, and how those have affected queer spaces and queer neighborhoods over time. So I think that's worth checking out as well, just how um, societal shifts also affect the location of gay people, LGBTQ people writ large. The next question is from Liz. It is, what community organizations have y'all reached out to and worked with? CDCs, nonprofits, neighborhoods, POCs, POC orgs, etc.
I can start this time, but I guess what comes to mind immediately, this wasn't the direct result of the context statement itself, but San Francisco also has its cultural district program, and that's we have 10 cultural districts throughout the city, and they represent traditionally underrepresented communities where historically marginalized groups of people have lived, and this includes 3 LGBTQ cultural districts. We have the transgender district in the Tenderloin. We have the South of Market LGBTQ leather district, and then we have the Castro LGBTQ cultural district. So they've been really great project partners throughout much of our subsequent efforts in terms of identifying potential landmarks, in terms of reviewing our materials, serving as peer reviewers for historical accuracy, and also in terms of just general interpretation of sites. The South of Market Leather LGBTQ district is now doing a series of placards and sidewalk plaques, and that's a really great way to memorialize sites that for businesses that no longer exist but historically did as part of that community. So we have pretty good relationships with those districts. We have liaisons from the department that communicate with those districts regularly. So I would encourage folks to look at that program if it's something that they may be interested in.
Susan or Raphael, did y'all have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah. I keep toting New South and Historic Atlanta because that is who did a lot of our work. So partnering with them, we did, I mean, a lot of our research for our Atlanta Historic, and we had other people as well to help. So it's usually around people who have the same interest in and research advocacy that we do. Of course, we would like to reach out to more people as well to do this work. Listening to these guys who have a lot more experience or more time in their historic context has given me a lot of more ideas on how we can do some more partnering with other people. But yeah, we did have partnering with people who helped us a lot. And so, yeah.
Yeah, sounding like a broken record, just echoing Susan and Alex, but the partnerships were critical even for our first context statement. That the Black Cat Tavern that I mentioned, the one specific community activist who was really led that landmarking effort before our context statement existed, ended up informing a lot of what went into it, right? But I think that certainly in our case presents a challenge in terms of needing to move forward in time, in terms of just sort of acknowledging more resources. That we have to reach out to a lot of groups of people. Thankfully, they're there. We know who they are.
Thank you all. The last question is a little bit more general, not related to the context statements, but just planning at large and how to connect queer people, LGBTQ people to the profession. Do you all have any recommendations or any advice for those interested on how to educate and engage young folks, especially queer people of color, so that they know urban planning is a possible career? Um, yeah.
I mean, we have our internship program, for example. We do have a high school internship program, as well as a college grad school internship program, and I think those are probably the best ways. I think probably the high school one, especially given that at that point they haven't yet chosen a career path, and so we have several dozen high school interns every summer that get exposed to the work that we're doing on a daily basis. And so I would recommend something like that.
I would recommend, and we do have internships as well, for community people in particular to come to our community events and also make yourself known at those events. We do reach out to the community quite a bit here. If you're interested in that kind of, if you think at a young age you're interested, we'll be more than happy to take you under our wings. We do have a lot of connections with the universities here in the city, and that we would more than welcome. We do not have the high school thing is an interesting thing for us in the city of Atlanta. Sometimes it's hard to penetrate that. They're very protective of their high school students here. So we've tried to go that route, but it is still something I think we should look into. It's a very good suggestion, and it's something we shouldn't just give up on so readily. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would really echo Susan in that, engaging universities, especially in the educational infrastructure, is pretty critical because, somebody who went to school myself, I met a lot of very interesting and passionate people who are very convinced that, and I agree that planning does not just mean you work for a city, right? Like everybody who lives and engages their community in a place is doing planning in a way. And then the more people understand that, the better I think it is for all of us. But again, and I think as Susan just said, the high school age can be a little tricky, I suppose. The discourse around children and queer people now is very scary. I'm not going to deny that, so I think sometimes maybe there's a little bit of caution. But if somebody strikes you as young and passionate and engaged, like that, it's important to make it clear, like certainly all of us who work for cities, we all work in part of public events that anybody can go to, and we're not in the pandemic anymore. They're happening in person now, right? So these are things that people can really start engaging with at almost any age they want.
Well, thank you all. I really appreciate all those in-depth questions and the thought that went into them. That concludes the questions for the panel, both moderated and free response or from the audience. And so I just wanted to provide a few minutes for everybody to go around and have any final thoughts, close out their thoughts on this topic of LGBTQ historic context statements before we close the panel today. And we'll start with Alex.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Nathan, for hosting this, and thank you to APA for hosting this. Thank you to all of the panelists who have attended, and it was great to speak with all of you, to my co-panelists. And I just wanted to encourage folks to check out the San Francisco LGBTQ Historic Context Statement. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Happy to answer them. And I just want to encourage folks to continue with all the good work. I'd be definitely curious to hear more at future APA events on this topic. And, I recognize we have two panelists from California here, and that's great, but I'd be curious to hear from other people, other parts of the country, maybe smaller communities, places that maybe don't have the same sort of political support as we do, to better understand their challenges and how others are working through all of this. But it's again wonderful to be here and be connected with all of you.
And Susan?
Yes, I'd like to thank Nathan as well and the APA, and I'd like to thank you two gentlemen, Alex and Rafael. I learned quite a bit from you guys because as I said, our program is fairly new. The context statement is very new, so it gave me a lot of insight. But one parting thing that I'd like to say is that this work is extremely important, and visibility is very important. So I keep saying that because it is. And the more visible people are, the better they can be respected and well, should be respected at least. And so I really appreciate this, and we have some work to do here, but we're up to the challenge, and hopefully these kind of programs can keep going on and on and on. And I mean, it is interesting to have two California groups, no Midwest groups. We'd like to see some of them and see what's going on out there. I mean, we're the one Southern group, but it was nice to know other groups throughout. Who else is doing this type of work? Hopefully more people will be doing this type of work in the near future. And once again, I really want to thank you for inviting our city to be a part of it.
Of course, I couldn't leave out my own city.
That's right.
And finally, Rafael.
Okay.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Nathan, APA, Alex, Susan. It's been a great panel. I guess I would say that, as Alex said, take a look at our cultural context, our context statements. And I think depending on where you are, you'll probably know, like right off the bat, okay, that's very interesting. Here's how we're different. And that will give you a starting point of like, oh, this is now what we need to do to kind of, tell our story. And again, I mean, the importance of broadening that out, it's, for a long time, there were historians who even by the late 90s were sort of complaining that like, oh, gay history is only being looked at in like New York and the Castro, right? And then this idea of like, no, actually like, queer people are everywhere and queer history is everywhere. And it's really important to get a broader perspective. And that happens locally. That's happening near you right now.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for your time, for your responses, and thank you to all of the attendees who took the time today to come to this webinar. We are going to post this on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and then also there is the CM credits, which we covered at the beginning. It is also in your email from Eventbrite to be able to claim those CM credits both for the general CM as well as equity credit. If you have any questions regarding that or any challenges with claiming those, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help facilitate you getting credit for attending today. And if you have any other questions regarding this webinar, please send those my way as well. But thank you all.
And I just want to do a quick shout out. Thank you for being here. My name is Ethan Schaefer. I'm the LGBTQ and Planning Division Secretary and Treasurer, incoming Vice Chair. I just want to say, if you want to be a part of this organization and putting on great programs like what we had today, we are always looking for incredible people who want to be involved, who want to provide information, everything like that. Reach out to us at lgbtqplanning@gmail.com or hit us up on any of our social medias. We want to connect with you. So thank you all for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for the plug, Ethan. That's greatly important. We certainly welcome any participation. All right, well, that concludes today's webinar. Thank you all, and this will be posted in the next couple of days.